insects, among which we have the bee, the busy bee. We have wind. As the wind is blowing, the pollen is blown. As the wind is blowing, the pollen is too blown. Talk about the animals. Talk about water. And then not forgetting the birds, including that bird which has a very long mouth that it puts into the flower. As it gets out that sweet substance in it, it carries the nectar. Like you would take porridge and some remains onto your mouth. Similarly, the pollen stays around the beak of the mouth of the bird, and when it goes on to another plant, it carries along the pollen. After looking at that, we ask ourselves, what are these types of pollination? And I'm here to tell you that, children, we have two types of pollination. Which are these types of pollination? The first type of pollination is going to be, I'm going to make use of my flower. I'll attach my flower here onto the board. Let me put it around here. It's okay. Let me put it here. Let me put my flower here where everybody can see it. There we are. My flower is there. This flower has the following parts. Which are the parts? It has this part that I'll use something small to keep it out. That part of the flower called the style, together with the stigma. I do hope you can see that we have our stigma there, and then all around, all these ones are anther heads. We have our stigma there. Don't forget, children, that is our stigma. And we also have, I'll only pick one. I'll only pick one that we'll be looking at. We'll pick one that we want to use. Okay, unfortunately that one is cut. Let's put that. This yellow part we are seeing is the one we are calling the anthers. In our definition for pollination, we are saying the transfer of pollen grains from the anthers to the stigma. And here we have a type of pollination where the anthers are going to the pollen is moving from the anthers to the stigma. Can our pollen move? Yes. Pollen is moving from the anther to the stigma. Pollen is moving from the anthers to the stigma. But where is it coming from? It is coming from the same flower. The same flower. Once this happens, children, we give it a name. This type of pollination, where the pollen is moving from the anthers to the stigma, but of the same flower, it has a name. And the question is, do we know the name? Yes, we know the name. We are going for a short break. When we come back, I'll be telling you the name to this type of pollination. Let me see you shortly.
Time now for Fan Fact.
Welcome back from that short break, children. I know you're very eager. You want to know the name given to this type of pollination. And children, the name given to this type of pollination is what we call self-pollination. So our first type is going to be self-pollination. Self-pollination is the name given to this type of pollination. So, what is self-pollination? This is the type of pollination. This is the type of pollination where pollen is transferred from the anthers to the stigma of, I write there my word, of the same flower. A bit long, but we can understand it. This is the type of pollination where, let's write this one becomes where, change this one to RE, where pollen is transferred from the anthers to the stigma of the same flower. Children, the pollen is transferred from the anthers to the stigma, but of the same flower. I repeat, underline the word same. It has to be the same flower. Not from this flower to another flower. No. The same flower. If it is this flower, then the pollen is going to be transferred from the anthers here to the stigma. Let me open out here. If you could see carefully, we're talking about agents. You can see some insects moving. If you look at it carefully, you will see insects moving. There are some insects moving. These carry pollen. But let's go back to what we were learning. You see insects? There are some insects moving, clearly showing that as they are doing that, they carry along with them pollen. They carry along with them pollen. There are insects there. Look at them. Very many. I was talking about insects. And here we are lucky. We have our insects. So going back to what we were saying, self-pollination from the anthers to the stigma of the same flower. Of the same flower. Let me bring in another good example of a flower. We have our plant here. If you are talking about self-pollination, the pollen grain must move from the anthers to the stigma of this flower. It must be of this same flower, even if they are on the same plant. Not from here to this, no. I would bring in another very beautiful flower. Another very beautiful flower. If you're going to talk about self-pollination, it must be pollen moving from the anther of this flower to this same flower. not from this flower to this flower, not from this flower to that flower, or not from this flower to this flower, or from this flower to this flower. Yes, they are on the same plant. So, what is self-pollination again, children? Self-pollination, that type of pollination where pollen is transferred from the anthers to the stigma of the same flower. Whether on the same plant, it must be the same flower. Now, once it moves from one flower to another, children, I bring in another scenario. Once the pollen, the insect has fallen on this flower, it is flying. Are we seeing our insect flying? And it has gone on to this flower. Once that happens, another type of pollination happens. Another type of pollination happens. And that type of pollination is the one we call cross-pollination. Cross-pollination, because it's moving from this way, crossing onto another flower. So our type number two is the one we'll be calling cross-pollination. Cross-pollination. And what is cross-pollination? The transfer of pollen grains from the anthers to the stigma, but of different flowers. We shall say this is the transfer of pollen grains from the anthers to the stigma. The stigma, this is the transfer of pollen grains from the anthers to the stigma of, I write in my word, of different flowers. And I'll write in another word, and the word is but, of the same type. Of the same type. Children, we are heading for a very short break. When we come back, we shall try to understand more of what cross-pollination is. Let me see you after the break.
Do you know your plants and animals?
Welcome back from that short break, children. Before I went for the break, I had written a statement on the blackboard. Can we try reading together? We said cross-pollination, this is the transfer of pollen grains from the anthers to the stigma of different, I have to look at this word please, of different flowers, but they must be of the same type. If a flower is of a mango, that should go to another mango tree. If it is an orange, it should be orange. Not pollen from a mango going to cassava. Not pollen from maize going to oranges. That can't work. It must be of the same type. We have a plant with flowers that is going to help us get what cross-pollination is. we shall have here our plant, and the flowers are there. Let me attach it here with our very beautiful flowers. We have the flower, very beautiful flower indeed. And then we have our plant there. So what happens in cross-pollination is that pollen is carried from one flower to another flower, but they are of the same type. This is the same plant. Pollen can move from this flower and onto this flower. Our pollen moving from the anthers there to that. Or the vice versa, pollen can move from this plant. Let's have another flower here. It could be from this flower, because we are having our flower which is trying to open up. There we are. From that flower, okay, our flower is accepted. It could be from this flower and maybe to the other flower. It could be from this flower and maybe to that flower, or it could be from that flower to that flower. Once that happens, then we can say cross-pollination has taken place. What is cross-pollination? Transfer of pollen grains from the anthers to the stigma of different flowers, but of the same type. How else can we look at that? I could have my plant here, and then I have another plant here. What is going to happen? This plant is found in village A. This plant is found in village A, and I have another plant here which is found in village B. We have another plant which is found in village B. What is going to happen? Pollen is moving. These are different flowers. I could have flower A and I could have flower B. They are growing in different places. An insect is going to fall on this flower and it is going to carry the pollen to another flower. So we are having our insect leaving flower A and going with the pollen to that. This is village A or flower A in village A. And this is a plant in village B, but they are of the same type. The pollen can't move from this flower to this flower. No, they are not of the same type. So once pollen can move from here to that, it can be from this flower to that flower. It can be from that flower to this flower. Once that happens, then we are doing what we call cross-pollination. So children, briefly, what have we learned today? We have said we are looking at types of pollination, and the first one is the one called self-pollination. That involves the transfer of pollen from anthers to the stigma of the same flower. same flower. Should the pollen move from one flower to another, from one flower to another, from one flower of a different plant to another flower of the same kind of plant, we call that one cross-pollination. I do hope you know the two types of pollination, cross-pollination and self-pollination. Thank you for being good children. Till we meet again, bye-bye.
Sarah said,
Want a change? Give your child an education.
that's all, kids. Bye-bye.
Pick of the day on UBC, brought to you by.
Their job is to keep you and me healthy and well. But sometimes they try in vain.
Was brought to you by.
We've cut and reduced our MTN Momo withdrawal rates. Now you can withdraw mobile money at the lowest rates. You also get MTN Century Points when you deposit, send and withdraw MTN mobile money. Visit our Momo agents countrywide and withdraw mobile money at our reduced rates from 1st May 2021. Everywhere you go. MTN.
Obadde okyeteekerateekera. Kaseera kakanaayo kyani mu kisaawe ky'omupiira kalimu vaawo mpitewo kaakaasa mmeeme n'obuwanguzi bw'ebyafaayo.